The Leviathan is a monarchy. Welcome back to part 2 of my light overview of Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes. Let's further summarize other points of this book. According to Hobbes, a commonwealth is a conglomeration or grouping of people for the sake of security and peace. There soon develops a governing body where a single person or relatively small group of men act and vote as representatives in a governing role. Therefore, a small group of people have all the power to make the rules in a society. The author does acknowledge monarchies, aristocracies, and democratic republics, and that tyrannies and oligarchies are just perverted versions of the previously mentioned types of governments. Thomas states, "The difference between these three kinds of commonwealth consisteth not in their difference of power, but in the difference of convenience or aptitude to produce the peace and security of the people, for which end they were instituted." Here, Thomas reiterates that the function of a government is for peace and security, and from his perspective, each type has a certain effectiveness or efficiency about it, which touches on a concept that we should be cautious of. There is a temptation of one style over the other because one may appear to get things done quicker if the subjectively correct people were in charge. Next, let's go over Tommy's thoughts and summations of different types of government. First, let's review some bullet points of a monarchy. The riches, power, and honor of a monarch arise only from the riches, strength, and reputation of his subjects. For no king can be rich nor glorious nor secure whose subjects are either poor or contemptible or too weak through want or dissension to maintain a war against their enemies. Whereas in a democracy or aristocracy, the public prosperity confers not so much the private fortune of one that is corrupt or ambitious, as doth many times a perfidious advice, a treacherous action, or a civil war. So for anyone who desires a monarchical type of system, your wealth is still tied to the prosperity of the people, whereas in a democracy, wealth is least likely to be disproportionately sent to a corrupt individual. Moving on, monarchs will have an inner circle of advisors and typically will be people they've known for a long time. Monarchies or aristocracies aren't perfect. Inconsistency happens. An assembly of men may disagree with a monarchy, which may cause a civil war. In monarchies, there are brown-nosers that flatter in order to enrich themselves. Monarchies also have a weakness when power is passed to an infant. In these cases, power temporarily passes to a group of individuals until the infant is ready to rule. Thomas does note that in these situations, the group may enrich themselves unfairly during their tenure. Lastly, succession of power may also be uniquely problematic, usually need to be written or vocalized clearly. Now, moving on, Hobbes has seemingly little to discuss on democracy. First, he considered elective kingdoms where power is granted to a king for a short time. Nations conquered by democracy may be governed temporarily like an aristocracy or monarchy, which returns to the notion that systems where one or a small group can govern the most rapidly to provide security in a newly occupied territory, and temporarily would be the key principle in such an occupation. Lastly, there usually is a king and an assembly. The members of this assembly must be chosen or elected. If members are assigned internally, then it is an aristocracy or monarchy. Lastly, Hobbes on despotic type of governments. Power is seized by force and conquest. Fear of death or violence drives most of its organization. Thomas claims this type does not function via his definition of covenants. The despot controls his succession. He or she cannot be held accountable or punished. The despot is also the sole legislator and supreme judge. He or she chooses their inner circle, officers, judges, commanders, etc., similar to monarchies. Now let's move on to a big section of Hobbes where he discusses why commonwealths fall. Number one, internal disease such as internal mismanagement, corruption, or extreme expenses can cause a nation to collapse. 2. If the sovereign gives up too much power than is necessary to maintain peace and security, the commonwealth will fall. He also claims to be wary of the poison of seditious doctrines. Seditious doctrines would be any rhetoric or action that goes against, let's say, a Bill of Rights or a Constitution. I think those are good moral compasses. 4. In Tommy's opinion, if the Holy Bible is not utilized enough in sovereign governance, this will also weaken a commonwealth. 5. Here are a couple of quotes where Thomas loses me as a fan since he advocates that the monarch is above the law. He states, "A fourth opinion repugnant to the nature of a commonwealth is this, that he that hath the sovereign power is subject to civil laws. For to be subject to laws is to be the subject of the commonwealth, that is, to the sovereign representative, that is, to himself, which is not subjection but freedom from the laws. Which error, because it setteth the laws above the sovereign, setteth also a judge above him, and a power to punish him, which is to make a new sovereign, and again for the same reason a third to punish the second, and so continually without end to the confusion and dissolution of the commonwealth. So the people in charge should never be above the laws according to him. I think this would be a sign of corruption. 6. Thomas argues the stability of a commonwealth also depends on its access to the citizens' property. A fifth doctrine that tendeth to the dissolution of a commonwealth is that every private man has an absolute propriety in his goods, such as excludeth the right of the sovereign. So I think Hobbes is just stating that the governing body has some right to our material wealth in order to provide for peace and security. 6. I think Hobbes would be against republics or any separation of powers. He writes, "There is a sixth doctrine plainly and directly against the essence of a commonwealth, and it is this, that the sovereign power may be divided. For what is it to divide the power of a commonwealth but to dissolve it? For powers divided mutually destroy each other." I think he even uses the phrase, "a kingdom divided in itself cannot stand," to argue against separation of powers. He does go far to call separation of powers a disease and a danger. Number 8, Hobbes is against, or at least cautious of, adopting systems and practices from other nations. He sees this as a weakening of homeland sovereignty. Number 9, Hobbes endorses censorship. He writes, "From the reading, I say, of such books, men have undertaken to kill their kings, because the Greek and Latin writers in their books and discourses of policy make it lawful and laudable for any man to do so, provided before he do it, call him a tyrant. I cannot imagine anything can be more prejudicial to a monarchy than the allowing of such books to be publicly read, without presently applying such correctiveness of discreet masters as are fit to take away their venom." So, great rhetoric, but still wrong. 10, Hobbes also considers monopolies a serious economic problem. He also considers a popular person a threat to sovereignty and commonwealth, especially if they are popular amongst the soldiers and military. And lastly, too much foreign conquest can strain the finances, security, and focus of a commonwealth. Overall, it seems Thomas summarizes people are at their most selfish and violent unless they participate in a social contract, that they are a part of a commonwealth with laws and structure. Thomas argues that wild men are prone to war and seek dominion over others, which is an urge prevalently fueled by partiality, pride, revenge, and the like. Ideally, to be governed by principles of justice, equity, modesty, and mercy, or treating others how you want to be treated. His ultimate solution is to establish and participate in a strong monarchy. Thank you for listening. I'm The Average.